You're at 25,000 feet over Germany, somewhere near Leipzig. The temperature outside is minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside your B-17 Flying Fortress, it's not much warmer. Your oxygen mask is fogging up, your fingers are numb despite the thin leather gloves, and every few minutes, the aircraft shudders from anti-aircraft fire exploding nearby. Through the small plexiglass window, you see black puffs of smoke marking the sky, deadly flowers blooming at your altitude. You check your instruments again, trying to ignore the growing knot in your stomach. You're supposed to be flying in one of the most heavily armed aircraft ever built, a flying fortress that can supposedly defend itself. But you've already watched 3 B-17s from your formation spiral down in flames just today. You're wondering if you'll be next. What you don't know is that the real danger wasn't just the German fighters or the flak. It was something far more insidious, something built into the very design of this legendary bomber. By the end of this story, you'll understand the dark reason why B-17 crews were actually losing the air war, despite flying in what was supposed to be the ultimate weapon. In the early 1940s, American military planners had a revolutionary idea. Instead of tactical bombing that targeted specific military installations, they proposed something called strategic bombing, the systematic destruction of Germany's industrial capacity, transportation networks, and civilian morale. The theory was simple. If you could destroy the factories producing weapons, the railways moving supplies, and the will of the people to continue fighting, you could win the war without a bloody ground invasion. The B-17 was designed to be the spearhead of this campaign. With its ability to fly at high altitudes, long range, and heavy defensive armament, it was supposed to be able to penetrate deep into enemy territory, drop its bombs with precision, and return home safely. The Army Air Forces believed that formations of B-17s flying in tight boxes could provide mutual protection against enemy fighters, making each aircraft a flying fortress. The environment they would face was brutal. Sub-zero temperatures, thin air requiring oxygen, and the constant threat of enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire. But on paper, the B-17 seemed like the perfect solution. Then the shooting started, and the paper logic died. On paper, the B-17 was a masterpiece of engineering. With its 4 powerful Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines, it could reach speeds over 280 miles per hour and carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs. Its service ceiling of 35,000 feet meant it could fly above most enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire. But what made it truly special was its defensive armament. 13 50 caliber machine guns bristled from every angle, nose, tail, dorsal, ventral, and waist positions. In theory, this meant that no matter where an enemy fighter approached, it would face a hail of bullets. Crews initially respected the B-17 for its ruggedness. Stories circulated of fortresses returning to base with massive damage, missing engines, and large sections of their wings shot away. German pilots initially feared the B-17, calling it Wehrmacht, 4-engine, and approaching attacks with caution. The combat box formation, developed by the 8th Air Force, seemed to provide additional protection, with bombers flying in tight formations that allowed overlapping fields of fire. But the advantage came with a bill. The first, dark reason was something no one had fully anticipated. The B-17 was most vulnerable precisely when it was supposed to be strongest, during combat. The combat box formation that looked so perfect in theory became a deadly trap in practice. By flying in tight, predictable formations, B-17s created a perfect target for German anti-aircraft fire. Imagine you're a German flak battery commander on the ground. You see 36 bombers flying in a tight box formation at 25,000 feet. You don't need to aim for individual aircraft. You just need to fill that box of sky with exploding shells. The math is simple and deadly. American crews called it flak happy, the psychological effect of knowing that with every burst of flak, your chances of survival decreased. The combat box also made it difficult for damaged aircraft to take evasive action without colliding with other bombers. You're flying straight and level, maintaining your position in the formation, while shells explode all around you. The aircraft shudders with each near miss. You see a B-17 just ahead take a direct hit. Its left wing shears off, and the aircraft spirals down in flames. You can't maneuver away without breaking formation and making yourself an easy target for fighters. So you fly straight ahead, hoping your luck holds. That was the first dark reason. The very formations designed to protect the B-17s actually made them more vulnerable to flak and limited their ability to evade danger. And that was only the first problem. The second dark reason was the B-17's critical vulnerability to head-on attacks. Despite its impressive defensive armament, the Flying Fortress had a significant blind spot directly in front. The nose-mounted 50 caliber machine guns had limited traverse and elevation, making it difficult to engage fighters approaching head-on, especially at high speed. German pilots quickly learned this weakness and developed attack tactics to exploit it. They would approach from the front and slightly above, where the B-17's guns couldn't effectively target them. The solution was the addition of a chin turret on later B-17G models, but for most of the war, earlier models bore the brunt of these attacks. Imagine you're in the cockpit of a B-17F. Suddenly, you see enemy fighters approaching head-on. They look tiny at first, then grow rapidly. You hear the waist gunners firing, but their bullets fall short. You try to maneuver, but you need to maintain formation. The German fighters open fire with their cannons and machine guns. You see tracers and cannon shells streaming toward you. The cockpit fills with smoke as rounds strike the nose. The pilot slumps over, hit multiple times. The co-pilot struggles to maintain control as the aircraft begins to lose altitude. That's the second dark reason. The B-17's defensive armament had a critical blind spot that German pilots learned to exploit with deadly effectiveness. But there's more to this story. The third dark reason was something that affected every crew member, yet was rarely discussed. The B-17's oxygen system was unreliable at best, deadly at worst. At the altitudes where B-17s operated, typically 25,000 to 35,000 feet, the air is too thin to sustain human life. The aircraft was equipped with an oxygen system that was supposed to keep the crew conscious and functional, but this system was prone to freezing, leaking, and outright failure. When oxygen systems failed at altitude, crew members would lose consciousness within minutes, dooming the entire crew. Imagine you're the ball turret gunner, curled in the fetal position in your plexiglass bubble beneath the aircraft. You've been at 28,000 feet for 3 hours now. Your oxygen mask feels tight against your face, but you're starting to feel dizzy. You check your oxygen flow indicator. It shows normal, but your vision is tunneling and your thoughts are becoming sluggish. You try to call for help on the intercom, but your words come out slurred. The last thing you remember is the cold plexiglass against your helmet as you lose consciousness. Above you, the rest of the crew continues the mission, unaware that one of their own is dying just feet beneath them. That's the third dark reason. The very system designed to keep crews alive at altitude was often their silent killer. The fourth dark reason was the extreme cold that B-17 crews endured, something that photographs and newsreels never fully captured. At 30,000 feet, temperatures could drop to 60 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The B-17's heating system was inadequate at best, non-existent at worst. Frostbite was a constant threat, particularly for gunners who had to expose their hands to operate their weapons. Many crew members improvised their own protective gear, but it was often insufficient. Imagine you're a waist gunner on a 6-hour mission over Germany in January. Your position has no heating, just a small window that you must open to fire your machine gun. Despite wearing electrically heated gloves, your fingers are numb and unresponsive. Your breath freezes on the inside of the window, obscuring your view. You try to stay alert, scanning the sky for enemy fighters, but the cold seeps into your bones, making you sluggish. When fighters finally appear, you struggle to operate your gun with frozen fingers. You manage to fire a short burst before the window jams in the open position, flooding your position with even colder air. By the time you land, your fingers are black with frostbite, and you'll spend weeks in the hospital, possibly losing parts of several fingers. That's the fourth dark reason. The extreme cold at altitude was as deadly as any enemy weapon, slowly killing crew members with frostbite and hypothermia. The fifth dark reason was the psychological toll of combat, something that military planners had largely ignored. The Army Air Forces initially believed that high-altitude bombing would be relatively safe, with crews facing little danger, but reality proved different. The B-17 was not the invulnerable fortress it was advertised to be. Crews watched their friends die in horrific ways, aircraft exploding, crews bailing out at altitude only to have their parachutes fail, or being trapped in burning aircraft. The constant stress of missions, the fear of death or capture, and the trauma of watching comrades die took a devastating toll. Imagine you're on your 20th mission, just 5 away from completing your tour of duty and going home. You've already seen 12 aircraft from your original group go down. You've watched friends die or become POWs. Every night, you wake up sweating from nightmares of falling aircraft and burning comrades. During the day, you jump at loud noises and startle easily. You've developed a tremor in your hands that you can't control. The flight surgeon says you're suffering from combat fatigue, but there's no treatment except rest, and there are no breaks in the mission schedule. You have to keep flying, despite knowing that you're not at your best, that your reaction time is slower, that your judgment is impaired. You're a danger to yourself and your crew, but there's no escape. That's the 5th dark reason. The psychological toll of combat degraded crew performance, making them less effective and more vulnerable. The 6th dark reason was the mismatch between American bombing doctrine and the reality of aerial warfare. The US Army Air Forces believed in precision daylight bombing, with aircraft flying in straight lines to their targets, maintaining formation and dropping their bombs accurately. This doctrine assumed that the B-17's defensive armament would be sufficient to protect against enemy fighters. But the reality was different. German fighters developed effective tactics to break up formations and pick off individual bombers. They learned to attack from angles that exploited the B-17's defensive blind spots. They used heavy cannon that could cripple a B-17 with just a few hits. The American doctrine of maintaining formation at all costs meant that damaged aircraft couldn't take effective evasive action. The belief in precision bombing meant that aircraft had to fly straight and level over their targets, making them perfect targets for anti-aircraft fire. Imagine you're approaching your target, a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt. You know from previous missions that the flak here is particularly heavy and that German fighters will be waiting, but your orders are clear. Maintain formation, fly straight and level over the target, and drop your bombs precisely. As you approach the target, the sky fills with flak. Aircraft around you are hit and begin to fall, but you maintain course, knowing that breaking formation makes you an even easier target for fighters. You drop your bombs and turn for home, but your formation is now scattered, with damaged aircraft struggling to keep up. German fighters, like wolves, pick off the stragglers one by one. You watch as another B-17, its left engine on fire, falls behind and is attacked by 3 German fighters. It explodes in a ball of flame, taking 10 men to their deaths. That's the 6th dark reason. American bombing doctrine created a tactical nightmare that German forces exploited with deadly effectiveness. The final dark reason was perhaps the most devastating of all. The B-17's defensive armament, while impressive on paper, was often ineffective in combat. The 50 caliber machine guns looked formidable, but they had significant limitations. At the closing speeds typical of aerial combat, a gunner had only a few seconds to identify, track, and engage an enemy fighter. The vibration of the aircraft, the cold, the oxygen mask, and the stress of combat all degraded accuracy. German fighters learned to attack quickly and from unexpected angles, minimizing their exposure to the B-17's guns. They also developed armor that could withstand 50 caliber rounds, meaning that even well-aimed shots might not bring down a fighter. Imagine you're a tail gunner, crammed into your tiny compartment at the rear of the aircraft. You've been scanning the sky for hours, your neck aching from the constant motion. Suddenly, you spot 2 German fighters approaching from below and behind. You shout a warning into the intercom and swing your guns toward them, but they're moving fast, and the vibration from the aircraft makes aiming difficult. You fire a short burst, but the tracers show you're shooting behind them. The fighters open fire with their cannons, and shells tear through the tail of your aircraft. Alarms scream as hydraulic systems fail. The aircraft begins to yaw uncontrollably. The fighters come around for another pass. You fire again, but this time your guns jam. You're defenseless as the fighters make their final attack. That's the final dark reason. The B-17's defensive armament was often ineffective against determined enemy fighters using superior tactics. These dark reasons, vulnerable formations, defensive blind spots, unreliable oxygen systems, extreme cold, psychological stress, flawed doctrine, and ineffective defensive armament combined to make B-17 combat missions one of the most dangerous experiences of World War II. The 8th Air Force suffered more casualties than the entire US Marine Corps in the Pacific. Over 26,000 airmen were killed and another 28,000 became prisoners of war. The B-17, despite its reputation as a flying fortress, was actually a death trap for many of its crews. The dark reason B-17 crews were losing the air war wasn't any single factor, but a combination of design limitations, tactical vulnerabilities, and environmental challenges that turned each mission into a lottery with death. The aircraft that was supposed to be able to defend itself actually required long-range fighter escorts to survive. The formation that was supposed to provide mutual protection actually made the bombers more vulnerable to flak. The defensive armament that looked impressive on paper was often ineffective in combat. The oxygen systems that were supposed to keep crews alive at altitude frequently failed. The cold that was merely an inconvenience on the ground became a deadly enemy at 30,000 feet. The psychological stress of combat degraded crew performance and morale. And the bombing doctrine that emphasized precision and formation flying played directly into German hands. The lasting impact of these dark reasons was profound. The high casualty rates forced the Army Air Forces to reconsider their tactics and doctrines. The addition of long-range escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang dramatically reduced B-17 losses. The development of better oxygen systems, heated flight suits, and improved crew comfort increased survival rates. The shift from precision bombing to area bombing reduced the time bombers had to spend over heavily defended targets, and the hard-won lessons of the European air war influenced the design of subsequent bombers and the development of air power doctrine for decades to come. The B-17 remains an iconic symbol of American air power in World War II, a testament to the courage and sacrifice of its crews. But behind the legend lies a darker truth. These flying fortresses were often death traps, and the men who flew them paid a terrible price for the beliefs of military planners who underestimated the enemy and overestimated their technology. War punished the assumption that technology alone could overcome the brutal realities of combat, and the men inside paid the price.